Welcome, everyone, to this week's Mixture of Experts. I'm your host, Bryan Casey. Every week, we cover the top stories from around the industry in artificial intelligence. Today, we're excited to bring you three of the top stories from across the industry. We'll be kicking things off today with Claude 3.5 Sonnet.
So even though I have this beautiful model that does this really well, and I'm super excited that finally we're able to do this, I couldn't see the actual use case and the ROI to recommend that to one of my clients.
Second on the agenda today, we'll talk about the new Bird-Bench text-to-SQL benchmark. We'll talk about which models are doing well, which ones aren't, the keys to success, and what the future might hold for AI-driven analysts in the enterprise.
We have models that are pretty good at code, especially with a human in the loop. They can already add value today. But there's a lot of challenge with data.
Third on the agenda today, we'll talk about AI content, the present, the future, what's working well right now, what's not, and what we're hoping to see.
So most of the things we've been talking about here are a little bit harder to understand, whereas you see a picture of Shrimp Jesus and it's funny. And you're like, all right, that was funny.
Joining us this week to cover all the most important topics in AI, we have Shobhit Varshney, VP and Senior Partner, Gen AI in the Americas. We have Marina Danilevsky, Senior Research Scientist. And we have Michael Glass, an AI researcher. We've been debating renaming the show from Mixture of Experts to America's Next Top Model because it seems that every week there is an announcement of yet another model that is yet on top of yet another leaderboard. And today we're going to talk about two of them. We'll talk about Claude. We'll talk about the Bird-SQL leaderboard. We have some other topics, but we're going to jump right in and talk about the release of Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which recently came out and is topping a lot of the big leaderboards. And to kind of kick things off, Shobhit, I wanted to turn it over to you and just, one of the things that I notice is that one of these things happens like every week. And I'm just curious, like how enterprise clients are ingesting this stuff. Are they, waiting on pins and needles being like, when's the next model coming just so I can update all my API calls to a new one? Or are they like, well, I just did this. Like, do I need another one? Like, how does this stuff land for them? And like, are they actually able to ingest the pace at which things are coming out right now?
Brian, what a world we live in, man. Like from GPT 4.0 and now with Claude 3.5, just the pace of innovation and what my 10-year-old kid has access to is just insane. Like, we've got to wait and appreciate how far AI has come so quickly. So I'm a huge fan of the big models that we're seeing, and the capabilities are just absolutely stunning. From an enterprise perspective, majority of our clients are still users of AI. So they will go sign up for a large SaaS platform, an Oracle or Copilot with Azure and so on and so forth, and they'll be consuming AI through that particular vendor in the SaaS format, in which case now the vendor is choosing which models to use and so on and so forth. There's a small subset of teams that are actually building their own models, or they're configuring their own LLM apps end to end. Here, kind of made some choices on going to bring in. So in this case, AWS investing $4 billion plus in Anthropic gives people access to 3.5. So if you have an enterprise that has already built entire end-to-end contract analytics on Azure, they are not going to be able to use the 3.5 goodness that comes from Claude. They'll continue to use their GPT 4.0s and 3.5s and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of, in the enterprise space, the coolest model is not what you really get access to. There's a lot of things around what happens to the liability and indemnification, and does it really, I've spent enough energy in making it understand my domain. So enterprises don't quite switch models the way we do. I dropped my my chat GPT Plus, and I switched over to Claude to experiment more with it, right? So as an individual user, I'm going to keep switching around for the best model, and I no longer use my Gemini subscription as well, right? So I may follow more than what an enterprise would.
That makes a lot of sense. And Marina, Michael, question for both of you. Like the announcement, I thought was interesting because it was a mix of improved capabilities across a lot of the dimensions that we're accustomed to people talking about, just benchmarks, vision, but it was also product announcements where they were talking more about artifacts and projects. And actually, like in some ways, Shobhit, to your point about like people like ingesting SaaS tools, they went from like Claude is like going a little bit away from just like that like standard chat interface to like behaving a little bit more like a SaaS tool in some of these areas. So like I'm curious if you all thought that the more noteworthy piece with some of the capabilities are actually just like where they're nudging the product from, the end result of all technology is B2B SaaS on some level. But if like which one of those dimensions that you found kind of more interesting about the technology and just like where it means or what it means in terms of like where things are going?
Oh, well, for me, the business part of it maybe didn't land as strongly. I was interested more in the scientific progress angle. The thing with these closed models, you don't necessarily know what they did that got the performance increase, but you do see the performance increase. It's an interesting mystery what's behind all of that.
I think that speaks to maybe a very slightly different work that Michael and I do when it comes to the research side. He's certainly more on the science theory side. I end up swimming sometimes more in the business application, both of which are really valid. I actually was interested in the artifacts side and their claims. I haven't played around with it yet myself, but the claims of how it would be used for potentially for work collaboration or how to create things that are richer, because I'm really interested in how these models actually end up being useful rather than maybe how they work on particular benchmarks. There, though, I would like to know the science behind why is this one, according to Anthropic, going to be better or more useful? Is it merely because of the workflow UX that they're enabling, or there's something to this model versus other models? And actually, that's something I'm really interested to dive deeper into.
So team, on the core capabilities, though, I do feel that the artifacts having a window on the side where they're now going to be enabling some team collaboration, that's going to go quite a long way. Today, each data scientist has their own space, and we continue to work in that. So I'm pretty excited about what we can do. I was working with my 8-year-old daughter, and we were trying to figure out how to create a game that she was playing on her iPad and say, let's replicate that with Claude. And absolutely stunning how well it was able to do that. And we were able to iterate through it and see things moving on the right side, and you could see that thing upgrading. We have, when we look at benchmarks across these different vendors, as soon as the announcement comes in, we're like, oh, rah, champagne, open the champagne. It's such a great benchmark, right? But in the real enterprise world, we have to go deploy that in our own use cases and see if it's working and stuff, right? So I would like to share one example. I was recently in our Bangalore center. In Bangalore, we have our industry labs where we have set up different sections to each industry, CPG and utilities and so on and so forth. In the utilities wing, we had actual dials of machines, right? So you had these analog dials and there's a whole radial, and the needle is pointing towards the reading, right? So we work closely with a lot of our utilities and manufacturing clients, with Boston Dynamics and whatnot. So we get a bunch of images coming off of those. And the image is of a dial that's at an angle, it is reflecting some sun, and a lot of the markings over time have actually rubbed off. So they'll be marking at 1, at 3, 4, 5. So the middle 2 is missing. And then most of these dials also have a green marker that says, hey, this is the safe zone for this particular dial. I've been very frustrated so far that OpenAI's GPT-4o, the best-in-class model, if I give it those images that I'm working with today, was not able to go look at the reading. And I was pleasantly surprised to see 3.5 Claude take that image and was able to correctly annotate. And the way I'd asked the question was figure out all the major ticks and all the smaller ticks after that, and then figure out where the needle is, and then tell me if it's in the green zone or not. It absolutely nailed it. And I was very pleasantly surprised. It didn't get the green zone part correct, but comparing Gemini Pro 1.5 to 4.0 from GPT, and then now Claude 3.5, I could see that. But then we started to do the math on it. My team does this when we are doing millions of these images every day for our clients. And we started to do the math. Our pipeline is a classic machine learning YOLO-based model, and we have different versions. We've done the whole thing end-to-end. We're using some segment model from Meta to figure out what's where in the image and stuff. The accuracy that I'm getting there is more consistent, but the price point of delivering that for this utility is a fraction of what I'm getting from Claude's 3.5. So even though I have this beautiful model that does this really well, and I'm super excited that finally we're able to do this, I couldn't see the actual use case and the ROI to recommend that to one of my clients.
What was the actual difference? Was it like a factor of 10 or a factor of 2?
So out of say, I put it through about 20 images through it, and Claude got about 18 of them correct. That was pretty high, and GPT-4, Gemini was actually not doing very well on those particular images and stuff. GPT-4 was doing a bit better, but getting 18 out of 20 correct, that's quite a bit. Unfortunately, even 18 is not high enough for any of my clients, right? They need to have very high accuracy. If you're talking about plants, like power plants, power production is happening, you have to be pretty spot on. You can't just have a 18 out of 20 correct.
Do our clients have a sense of how, like, their use cases that are close? It's like we almost have capable enough models to unlock, these sorts of dimensions, and we're just waiting. And like once we get there, like this thing is going to be able, we're going to be able to use these things. I know some of the emergence is oftentimes like unpredictable, and so you don't actually know when a capability is going to show up. But do they have like good feel for the things that are close versus the things that are like way farther away in terms of real use cases?
I think that you're actually pointing at something interesting. So a lot of the clients are still not quite at the point where they know what it takes to trust these systems, even in something that's text and not multimodal, but it's just a single modal. There's a feeling of, yeah, I play with it for a little bit and it seems to pass the initial sniff test, but I can still consistently break it. And the risks just continue to be too high, exactly what Shobhit just said, of it messing up one time, having either a viral negative PR moment or a lawsuit or, anything else of that. So because there's still this feeling of actually, I don't get the sense that there is that level of comfort that where they're ready to really completely put it into production unless it's fully wrapped by something else, an amount of guardrails, an amount of anything that's able to catch it. So certainly not there yet, at least from my particular experience. I don't know, Shobhit, if you've seen something different.
Yeah, so there are certain use cases like code completion, like any code development. That's the biggest progress we have seen in the industry. From across all vendors, we have done some amazing work with our Granite code models that are small, tiny, understand the domain beautifully, and they can help with code completion, end-to-end lifecycle. So far, we've been most impressed with the accuracy that we get out of code completion, especially for the more popular languages, right? The second has been around customer care. There are internal-facing use cases in customer care, not external. You don't want to sell a car for $1 to end users. You want to make sure that you're doing something in where it's internal-facing, looking for insights, looking for transcribing speech and figuring out what's happening, things of that nature, creating test data sets, training data sets. Those are working out really well, agent-facing workflows. So those two, I would say we are close enough where we have great deployments and they're being done at scale across a large set of AI vendors. I think the tip over point is when it starts to look at data really well. So far we're talking about text. The big chasm it needs to cross is structured data sets. This is where we're looking at your data is in SAP or in Salesforce, Oracle, things of that nature. And now all of a sudden in the middle of my workflow, there's unstructured documents. It's getting there where it can give you lineage, tell you where the answer came from. But when it comes to structured data sets, LLMs don't inherently understand data really well. So most of the attempts have been, can I go from natural language into making a API call or a SQL statement, things of that nature, and then I'll go grab some data. That's the area that's going to unlock a significant amount of productivity once we understand how to pull in structured data sets into our natural language conversation.
I wonder if that's a great pivot to the second topic, which is to talk a little bit about structured data and even just the Bird-SQL benchmark. Do you want to maybe like kick us off there and just talk a little bit about what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, I think it goes directly to what Shobhit was saying, that we have models that are pretty good at code, especially with a human in the loop. They can already add value today, but there's a lot of challenge with data. So you can take their strength to address that weakness and create a text-to-SQL model so that people can interact with their data, using natural language. And with a human in the loop, you can examine the SQL statement, ideally with some explanation, also from the LLM about what it's doing and why, to gain confidence that is really selecting the right result set. That is the data I wanted to get out.
That makes sense. And I think there's a few benchmarks in this space that are actually, there's benchmarks for everything. We could probably also retitle this show just the benchmark show on some level. But I think there's a few benchmarks, I want to say, in the text-to-SQL area. And I believe Bird is one of them. Do you want to talk at all about? I read the paper that they published on that, but do you want to maybe just take a minute and talk a little bit about the approach that they're taking, why it's maybe a little bit different from some of the other benchmarks that are out there in this space?
Sure. Yeah, I think for a long time, Spider 1.0, I should clarify now in case 2.0 comes out soon, that benchmark was very popular, drove a lot of research, but it reached a point where people were getting 90+% on it. The hard questions weren't that hard and didn't necessarily challenge state-of-the-art LLMs anymore. So with BirdBench, the organizers still made a variety of difficulty levels, but the challenging questions in Bird are much more challenging than the extra hard questions in Spider. So it really moved the difficulty level. Also, the databases in Spider were created. All database schemas are created, and the ones in Spider were invented by database students. But the databases in Bird were gathered from real-world databases and sets of data sets. So they're considerably more messy, which is going to be the case in the real world. You're going to have to deal with databases that are not very clean, not well normalized, have missing and messy data. So there's both of those challenges, the difficulty and reality of the schemas, as well as the difficulty of the information need, the complexity of the information need.
There are two different things that the Bird-SQL paper did. One was looking at the actual accuracy of the SQL statements, but then they were also looking at the efficiency of the SQL statement itself. There are different ways in which I could join tables and get the answer out. And in some of the comparisons, one query could take 42 seconds, the other one could take 5 seconds, right? So there's obviously efficiency and then effectiveness score with Bird-SQL too. Do you see that in other benchmarks as well?
I think that was their innovation. That was one of the things they brought was, I think also maybe related to the complexity of the queries. When you reach a level of complexity, there's now many ways of answering that by crafting many joins or maybe some subselects. So they can vary considerably, as you say, in the actual efficiency, the time it takes to execute. So I think that was maybe something that came out of just developing a more complex benchmark.
Michael, where do you think there might be a good direction to go for the next set of benchmarks? Of what are the next set of hard questions that you would like to see if you could get a benchmark on order? What might be valuable?
I do think that there's a lot of questions, and it was true in Spider, it's true in Bird, that have a very simple result set. It's just asking for a particular number. I think a lot of what people want to do with their data is to build a result set which they can then visualize. So it would have many rows with some aggregation over, often location and time. That could then be presented in a dashboard. That's not a high percentage of Bird. There's not very many queries that are suitable for that kind of visualized analysis. So that's what I would like to see.
And follow-up queries, right? Once you have that kind of aggregation, you could then potentially even turn it into like a multi-turn type of stuff.
So Tim, I want to highlight a few things about Bird-SQL. I was generally very impressed. There are about close to 13,000 unique questions as part of the test data sets. There's about close to 100 big databases. It represents about 30 GB plus of data that we're querying, right? So a whole bunch of different professional domains for that. And on that benchmark, IBM's Granite models are number one. We crushed it. We have the EXSL plus our Granite 20 billion parameter model from IBM Research. That is currently the king of Bird-SQL. Can you just highlight in a couple of sentences, what are some of the innovations that IBM has done in that space to get the SQL just nailed?
Yeah, I think it's a multi-stage, multi-piece model. So one thing we call schema linking is just identifying what piece of this database is actually relevant for answering your question. typically you're going to have many tables, many columns for each table, but only a small fraction are actually relevant for what you're asking. So that was a big focus, is first narrowing down what piece of the database is relevant. Then there's another part where we tried to identify what are the conditions that you need to match against in the database. So the values in the database can be represented in many ways, and this is part of having realistic databases. It can be represented by y and n for a Boolean column, or 0 and 1, or true and false. Dates and places can be represented in so many different ways. So just that ability to understand what you need to include in your query that will actually match the values in the database, that was also a significant part.
I'll tell you from my perspective, this whole area is one of the more exciting and interesting spaces and opportunities for folks who worked with me a few years ago. Once upon a time, I used to manage. I've managed analytics teams a couple different times in my life, and we used to have an analytics request channel within our digital team that I used to joke and tell people was my least favorite Slack channel in all of IBM. And it actually basically functioned as a text to SQL model, which is that people would just dump in requests, and then our analytics team would just go off and return, an hour later or a day later with an Excel file being like, I ran some SQL, here's your answer. And I would just sit there and stew at that channel and just be mad all day long, basically, because I would look at that and be like, you guys should learn how to do this yourselves. Why are you asking the team these insanely basic questions? If you can't answer these questions, how are you even doing your job? All the time, sort of thing. And so when I think about this space, the nirvana to me is that the questions that people would dump in the analytics request channel, they can just ask to an LLM in natural language. But one of the tricky things, I'd love the panelists' thoughts on this, is a lot of the things people want is their core KPIs that sometimes they're measured on. It's how am I doing on performance on this thing? And getting the wrong data in some of those, depending on the type of KPI, a lot of consequences sometimes of not getting that data accurate. So I'm just curious the team's thoughts on do we think we'll be more productive in this space early on, empowering analysts to be faster? Do we is that nirvana stage of, just business users asking questions in natural language, getting results back? Do we think that's closer than it feels right now? Where are we on that maturity curve?
We're going to get to a point where it's useful for a data analyst first. That's going to come well before it's useful for somebody who doesn't understand the SQL. But I think that a business user, it's on the horizon. It's with tools for explainability to provide some justification and verification of that this is actually answering what you're asking. I think that you can gain some confidence in the output of the LLM, even if you are not familiar with SQL.
I think there are a few different ways in which different vendors are going after this market. You have the classic business intelligence platforms, right? Analytics and BI tools. Gartner just released theirs this week. Again, Microsoft, Salesforce, Tableau, or Oracle, Google BigQueries, or the ThoughtSpots of the world, top right? So you'll have all these leaders who have been BI tools that are now not adding natural queries to it. Then you have another camp of Databricks and Snowflake. That's where the real ingestion engines are for queries, right? So you have a query that comes in, and you're going to fire it off in real time across multiple different sets of data sets. There, the speed of ingestion is going to be very, very quick. There, they are investing quite heavily in understanding what is in the data. So given a particular column, and there's a header for that says ABC underscore XYZ. Now, what does that name actually translate to in natural language? So there's a lot of work that's being done in interrogating and discovering the data, creating the right set of metadata attached to it, so that when somebody says, hey, I'm looking for numbers from this particular region across X, then you have a good way of mechanics to go and translate that to what it means in Snowflake's iceberg tables, or what does it mean in different formats across Databricks. So I think there's going to be a good mesh up between the pure BI players adding natural language, and then the data side of the world extrapolating and exposing more metadata around it, so you can nail the actual data where you need to go bring it from in the lineage. And then all the governance falls on the left hand side, where which data set has been approved for what kind of reporting. If you're looking at, say, creating a report around sustainability, there has to be a data catalog that's exposed. So now we're starting to understand how the data quality and the data catalogs discovery, there's a lot of effort that's going in that space. And now you're starting to scale up on the natural language inside of BI. BI reporting dashboards, that is still critical. Microsoft is attacking this with Power BI, where in the first iteration of it, Power BI Copilots was really focused more on the developers. So my team will go and build out a whole bunch of different dashboards. There's AI baked in for me to go switch out different panels and so on and so forth. Over time, now they're adding ways in which end user business analyst can just ask a natural language question, but then you have to go ask follow-ups and say, hey, did you mean this region or that one, and so on and so forth. But it's great to see this blend of data getting better and the tools that are analyzing and interrogating that data getting even better as well. We released our own Watson X BI tool that again tries to mesh that together from our Watson X data set. And on the right hand side, you have a better natural language query system that goes and pulls data out as well. But it's a very, very hot field for a lot of motion. I was writing an article about how the dots on the Gartner have moved on the BI. It's incredible how much movement has happened, and so many people are now moving into the leader space in the Gartner quadrant, whereas we didn't have those many last year.
One other interesting piece, and maybe as a last word, Marina, I'll throw it over to you. I was also just reading a bunch of like articles, Reddit threads, things like that about people who are trying to make text to SQL work inside of their companies. And like one of the interesting things people are saying, well, turns out documentation is useful for humans and also for LLMs. And so people were talking about actually building some like RAG patterns that were like just taking the documentation for their database and putting it into the context for the LLM. So it actually like had some sense of like what some of these fields were supposed to mean. So I'm just curious if you've seen, anything like interesting or noteworthy kind of, and just in the RAG space around how it intersects with the whole kind of text to SQL area.
I mean, I will add to that documentation is useful. Examples of, hey, I ran this kind of KPI report for one company for one thing. Can you do the same thing, but for something else? Those kind of examples are very useful. A reason that you could, I think, make a lot of progress, and we are making a lot of progress with this BI space, it's very similar just in code creation space. You're wanting particular functions in particular order, and you can very rapidly build up a sequence of things that you need and check whether it makes any kind of sense. So like what Michael and Shobhit, you were saying, that it can be a little bit hard to go straight to an end user who doesn't understand, but it's quite easy to go to a data analyst who looks at it and goes, all right, I immediately can see where this is going off the rails. Give me this information, this. That ends up speeding you up a whole lot, but the human can immediately tell where things are good, where things are bad. So what kind of knowledge is helpful to throw in, and especially examples of, oh yeah, it's like this, but for this company, for this time period, for this KPI, that's where you're going to get a lot of speed up, because you end up just doing a lot of the same thing over and over and over again, and that always means it's a place that's ripe for this human in the loop automation.
Every week we have a thread where we touch just like, what are people seeing in the industry? What do we think is interesting? Obviously, we covered some pretty big news so far. The last piece is there was an article going around that was talking about books for like $2.99 that were appearing in Kindle as like ads, and they're clearly 100% AI generated books, and they were nighttime stories for kids and parents, essentially. Which usually you don't hear that. Usually the nighttime story, which I think was a joke in the article, nighttime story for parents is just a book, right? As opposed to like a bedtime story. And it would be like, using your mind control powers for good. And it's just like all of this like uncanny valley, like ebook content that's out there. And we thought it'd be a good idea to just like talk about what's happening sort of in the content space. We've been using the term AI slop a little bit, and there's been a few things that have, I think, been going around the internet. I'd love to just get the panel's kind of experience with some of this, but some of the most recent ones I've seen is there was a video of like Dave Chappelle that went moderately viral, which was not Dave Chappelle speaking. It was somebody had one of the LLMs write like a routine and then basically piped it into Chappelle. There was a video that was going around of like Toys R Us's first like attempt to do an ad with Sora. There's like way too many SEO stories of people just like lighting domains on fire, building like LLM generated content. And one of the like maybe my hot take to start this off, and then I throw it to everyone else, is like content to me and content generation almost feels like a red herring for LLMs right now. It was the first thing that people latched onto. It's like, oh, I can get this thing to like write a blog post or a movie script. And like none of those use cases, I don't know if y'all have seen any of them, like none of those use cases have like seem like they produce really anything useful right now. And there's lots of other areas where like many interesting things are happening, like most of the conversation we've had here today. But like content still like takes up a weirdly high percentage of this discussion in the market. And there's just, I don't know if it's just not there yet, but I'm not seeing like good things happen in this space. So I'd love to just like open it up to the group and just have you seen anything else and that just like has struck you of being like, how did we get here to this place? And then do you also like, do you disagree with the take that, content is like a distraction almost in the LLM world right now?
I don't know if content is a distraction. It is something that is easy to create and easy to consume. So most of the things we've been talking about here are a little bit harder to understand, whereas you see a picture of Shrimp Jesus and it's funny. And you're like, all right, that was funny.
All right, I'll allow that there's one good use case then, is shrimp Jesus.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Slop, I would categorize it as some kind of mixture of funny, annoying, and dangerous. Funny is Shrimp Jesus. Annoying is these Kindle ads where you look at them and you're like, okay, the title is weird. The girl in the picture has 8 fingers. Okay, this is clearly some kind of low-grade content that is trying to get to see if it can get my attention. Then there's dangerous, which is the AI guide to mushroom foraging, which is going to kill you if you're going to go ahead and read that. That was going around a little while ago. And you're going to get this again because it is so easy to generate. Amazon lets you complain about these booksellers and take stuff down, but it's just as easy to put stuff back up again. So it's just going to continue to come back and continue to come back and go and be on various social media platforms because it's funny. I actually think there's something beneficial to this because it continues to keep in the public eye a reminder of just how easy it is to turn these things into trolls. And so that you don't fall into a sense of complacency of only hearing about, oh, this is successful, this is useful. Yeah, but as soon as you turn it to evil means, it actually still continues to be very easy and very, very clever. So I do think there's some use to that.
Bryan, I'm going to disagree with you. I think content creation is an amazing use case for enterprises. So like we within IBM, we've had a big partnership with Adobe and we do a lot of our marketing end to end. As long as it's done within constraints, you're using brand approved guidelines, you're using content that's been vetted and so on and so forth, there's a human in the loop, the content generation has delivered amazing value for us as IBM and we've done the same for our clients. And I'll take a more hot take on this. And this is something that Jan had shared. He runs all the AI for Meta. He had described how they're using LLMs to filter content before people post, right? So 2 years back, when they were looking at somebody about to post something on Facebook or Instagram, and they're trying to validate if this is hate crime abuse and so on and so forth, they would have 1 in 4 chances of actually catching content. Now, with their Llama models, they're able to get close to 94% of those about to be posted, they can flag them as something that should not be posted, right? So this is AI being leveraged for good instead of saying that, hey, if I can just generate a whole bunch of content, the reverse is also true. I'm leveraging these LLMs for some of my banks where we're doing social engineering attacks, security related, and we're able to identify which of these are actually social engineering hacks, right? So there's a flip side of this. And I would say content creation, I would think is an amazing superpower for LLMs if they're used rightly, in the right context in enterprise with the right guardrails around it.
You did say one thing, which that I think is underappreciated, and this is kind of what I meant by the red herring piece of it, is we actually, we do have some use cases on the team where we're using now, and it's like saved us a gazillion hours. So it's like, there are real things that have helped from a productivity perspective. But the second thing you mentioned that Jan talked about, where like, I think they're an underrated analytics tool. Actually, like it's a different type of like NLP analytics that like you couldn't do without human sort of judgment before. But now you have this other type of computer that can do a different sort of analysis. And we have so many use cases around that sort of activity. So it's like that sort of analysis, summarization, like how that plays into internal workflows, like just this like whole universe of value that we see there. And that sometimes I think it's like gets a little bit distracted. That's like, oh, you can create content. It's like, well, you can analyze it too. And you can do all sorts of other things with language. So, I do know there are legitimately some good use cases, but sometimes I get a little sad that we don't talk more about like the use case that you just talked about there.
Yeah, I'll say that I think for a long time we've had an abundance of some low quality content for blog posts and books.
That's true. The internet has not won the Academy Award.
Right. I think also, it speaks to the danger might be a little overstated that, we've developed defenses against human created fakes, which have been around for much longer than LLM or other models have been able to create any kind of convincing fake. So I think both the danger and the value of some of this content creation that humans have already created abundance of, probably pretty low.
That's true. I tell you, when I saw the Kindle thing, YouTube had all these sort of interesting challenges with like, they were calling it algorithmic slop back before Gen AI was even cool. And, I look at like a show like CoComelon. This is probably, there's only a very specific audience that's going to resonate with this, but I'm just, every time I hear CoComelon, I just like die a little bit inside. I'm like, put on Bluey. And so I look at CoComelon, that just like feels like an algorithm created like a child tuned like engagement engine essentially. And I'm like, oh, I see that Kindle stuff and I'm like, oh no, I can feel more CoComelons coming, and for like especially for kids. So, I don't know whether I would put that under the umbrella of dangerous, but it's like some of that. It's like I don't know, it makes me a little nervous on some level. That's far away from an enterprise use case, but maybe as like a parent, I see some of those things and I'm like side-eyeing it a little bit.
CoComelon is so interesting, by the way. I don't know if you've read about the company, but like it is absolutely based on tracking a lot of KPIs, like how long people watch the videos, and trying to game that as much as possible and maximizing that. Bluey, which I love, is wonderful content and it's not for that at all. And CoComelon really is how long can we keep the kids engaged? Yeah. They track like every second what the kids are watching. So there's a lot of AI being put to use there, although it's still being put to use by people who've decided that that's their goal.
Yes, I think overall, if you're looking at this the content creation part, you touched on this with Toys R Us, with Sora as well. The ultimate use case would be, I don't care much about who created the ad itself, right? Toys R Us did an amazing job at Canes releasing their ad, fully created by 80% created by Sora, right? Amazing work. But I really want to fast forward to a point where the movie that I'm seeing in my screen, I want to be in there. Like, I would love to have a scene with Beyonce, right?
That was not where I thought you were going. I was like, it's like, I'm the star of the movie.
Yeah, just imagine, right? Like, I would, like, if I'm watching Avengers and I'm a big Avengers fan, I would want to be helping Iron Man in that particular scene fighting Thanos, right? Just imagine the power of you creating a digital avatar of yourself and inserting inside of a movie that you're watching. I think that's the future that I want to live in. Don't tell my wife I referred to Beyonce and others, but
we're just gonna cut this part of the pod. So like it's over. But I think it will be very interesting to see how this space shapes up. There are places where it's like I could see like an algorithm and like a reinforcement learning type of thing producing like CoComelon on steroids, and people looking at that and be like, what is that stuff? But at the same time, I think there's plenty of places where like there's a ton of opportunity. There's like real stuff people are doing today. But there's also other interesting things like around like analysis that I wish people would pay maybe a little bit more attention to. So in any case, Marina, Shobhit, Michael, thank you for joining us today. It was a great discussion, and we will see you back here next time on Mixture of Experts. Thanks all.
Thanks so much for having
you.
us.